It was only with great reluctance that Karl Haushofer agreed to attend the treason trial of a rabble-rousing, brawling street politician named Adolf Hitler in 1923. The illustrious 54-year-old professor of political geography at Munich University had finally agreed, after much persuasion by his personal student at the university, Rudolf Hess. Disinterested at first, by the time Hitler delivered his final oration, Haushofer was convinced that he had found the savior of the German people that he had been seeking. Did this development lead to the establishment of the critical connection that ultimately allowed Hitler to take over dictatorial rule of Germany? Was Haushofer to become Hitler's link to a powerful and mysterious worldwide secret organization that apparently had access to advanced technology? The evidence is that in the 1930s, he founded a German branch called the Vril Society in Berlin. This secret group attracted its members from all the leading occult movements in Europe, as well as initiates from Tibet, Japan, India, Kashmir, Turkey, and Ceylon. One of the most popular books among insiders was The Coming Race by British occultist Edward Bulwer Lytton, a story about an underground utopian civilization where the inhabitants flew around in silent wingless vehicles, powered by a force called Vril, hence the name of their society. What did Vril have to do with German strategy in World War II? A great deal, if a mountain of evidence, both old and new, official and unofficial, is to be taken seriously. Towards the end of 1944, Allied pilots in the skies over Europe started reporting the appearance of strange flying globes that interfered with the electrical and radar systems of the American planes. At night, they appeared as balls of fire. Convinced they were faced with new German weaponry, the American flyers called them Kraut balls, but the French version of fireballs, Feuer balls, prevailed. In the American press, they were called Foo Fighters. There were many such reports in late 1944 and 1945. One pilot of a bomber flying over France said, "One by one the balls approached so close that they almost touched the wings. They were huge spinning balls, and for a short time we felt an intense sensation of heat." Renato Vesco, the former head of the technical section of the Italian Air Force, says in a letter, "Work on the German anti-radar Feuerball, or fireball, had been sped up during the fall of 1944 at a Luftwaffe experimental center near Oberammergau, Bavaria. There, and at the aeronautical establishment at Wiener Neustadt, the first fireballs were produced. Fast and remote controlled, the fireballs, equipped with klystron tubes, operated on the same frequency as Allied radar, which could eliminate the blips from radar screens. They showed that the Nazi technology had moved in a direction far beyond anything expected by Allied intelligence." It had indeed. The more important anti-gravity weapons research was carried on near Prague, primarily by Victor Schauberger and Richard Mithe. In 1944, Mithe, in cooperation with the Italians, developed the large helium-powered V-7 and the small one-man Vril models, there's that word again, which achieved a speed of 2,900 kilometers per hour in flight tests. From German secret weapons of the Second World War, Rudolf Lusar says, the development, which had cost millions, was almost complete by the end of the war. The former German designer Mithe is in the USA and, as far as can be determined, is designing flying saucers for A.V. Rowe & Company. The machines are purported to develop a speed of up to 7,000 kilometers per hour. Captain Hans Kohler developed the Hannibal II with a diameter of 25 meters, which carried a complete flight crew and was powered by a simple electrogravitational motor called the Kohler converter. A 7.5mm anti-tank gun was mounted on the underside. In a letter written by Victor Schauberger to a friend, he gives information from his direct experience. Quote, "The flying saucer, which was flight tested on the 19th of February 1945 near Prague, and which attained a height of 15,000 meters in 3 minutes, and a horizontal speed of 2,200 kilometers per hour, was constructed according to a model I built at Mauthausen concentration camp in collaboration with the first-class engineers and stress analysts assigned to me from the prisoners there. It was only after the end of the war that I came to hear that further intensive development was in progress at the works in Prague. The fundamental basis of it was the creation of an atomic low-pressure zone, which develops in seconds when either air or water is caused to move radially and axially under conditions of a falling temperature gradient. Evidently, the further intensive development that Schauberger missed was very fruitful. 2 months later, in the April of 1945, the following report filed by a French diplomat living in Switzerland was obtained from an informer in a German facility in Italy. The circular German fighter without wings or rudder suddenly overtook the four-engined Liberator, crossing its flight path at very high speed. When it passed in front of the formation, it gave off a number of little bluish clouds of smoke. A moment later, the American bombers mysteriously caught fire, exploding in the air while the German rocket had already disappeared over the horizon. This is reported in the Intercept UFO by Renato Vesco, originally published in Italian in 1968. The Germans had been working on the explosive gas weapon for years. In the end, they settled on a 50-50 mixture of butane and propane, which was ignited by the exhaust of the bombers. The circular fighter was the long-awaited final product of the long years of research and experimentation in 8 different areas: direct gyroscopic stabilization, television-controlled flight, vertical takeoff and landing, jam-free radio control combined with radar blinding, infrared search eyes, electrostatic weapon firing, hypercombustible gas combined with a total reaction turbine, and last but not least, anti-gravity flight technology. This was the incredible Kugelblitz, or lightning ball. If it had emerged even 6 months earlier, could the war have turned out differently? We will never know, because by this time, the Allied armies were rapidly converging on Berlin. So, the Kugelblitz puffed out a formation of bombers and flew off into history. Or did it? The various intelligence agencies of the Allied powers had gotten all the espionage reports and were well aware of what was going on in Hitler's underground Alpine facilities. Consequently, the invading armies knew precisely what to look for. Again, according to Vesco, tons of blueprints, company papers, lists of researchers, laboratory models, memoranda, reports and notes that covered every sector of the war industry came pouring out of thousands of unlikely hiding places. Most certainly, we can conclude that this much of the anti-gravity information fell into Allied hands. The fact that the Germans were developing advanced technologies during the end of the war is a matter of public record, as Sir Roy Fedden, chief of the technical mission to Germany for the Ministry of Aircraft Production, stated in 1945, "I have seen enough of their designs and production plans to realize that if they had managed to prolong the war some months longer, we would have been confronted with an entirely new set of deadly developments in air warfare." Captain Ruppelt, chief of the U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book, added in 1956, "When World War II ended, the Germans had several radical types of aircraft and guided missiles under development. The majority were in the most preliminary stages, but they were the only known craft that could even approach the performance of objects reported to UFO observers." Some of these German wartime technical advances were well known. The first military jet was the German Heinkel 178 that flew in 1939. In 1943, the Germans also deployed the only jet fighter to go into regular service during the war, the Messerschmitt 262. This jet could easily overtake the fastest Allied aircraft. Yet fortunately, Hitler ordered that these planes should be fitted as bombers rather than defensive fighters, which saved Allied aircraft from devastating casualties. Then, Heinrich Fock was involved in the design of and production of the FW-6, FA-223, FA-226, FA-283, and 284 models during the war. He designed a propulsion system known as the turboshaft, which is still used in most helicopters today. Using this technology, Fock designed this upright vertical takeoff aircraft, which was just coming off the drawing board as the war ended. At the end of each of the 3 long arms of this technologically advanced craft was a small jet propulsion unit. The rotating arms were used to lift the body from the ground like blades of a helicopter. In 1939, Fock patented a saucer-shaped craft with enclosed twin rotors described as follows. The exhaust nozzle forked in 2 at the end of the engine and ended in 2 auxiliary combustion chambers located on the trailing edge of the wing. When fuel was added, these combustion chambers would act as afterburners to provide horizontal propulsion to Fock's design. The control at low speed was achieved by alternatively varying the power from each auxiliary combustion chamber. Cruise missiles were also first used by the Third Reich, and V-1 bombs were launched from German-occupied territories across the Channel into England. The next German rocket, the V-2, proved to be the predecessor of the intercontinental ballistic missiles that filled the arsenals of the former Soviet Union and US during the Cold War. This missile could travel 225 miles at 5 times the speed of sound, and a single hit could take out a city block. The Germans also developed a rocket-powered fighter, the Me-163, and although it was never put into regular service, it was the first aircraft to fly faster than 600 miles per hour. These, then, were some of the known German advances. However, there were also hints of darker technologies not fully understood. It was in 1944 that knowledge of these became public for the first time, when the New York Times of the 14th of December reported, "Floating mystery ball is new German weapon." A new German weapon has made its appearance on the Western Air Front. It was disclosed today. Airmen of the American Air Force report that they are encountering silver-colored spheres in the air over German territory. The spheres are encountered either singly or in clusters. Sometimes they are semi-translucent. One typical incident was reported by a veteran pilot of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron. He was flying a mission over Hagenau, Germany on December 22, 1944, when at 6 a.m., whilst flying at an altitude of 10,000 feet, the pilot and his radar operator saw the 2 large orange glows rapidly climbing towards them. Upon reaching our altitude, the pilot reported, the objects leveled off and stayed on my tail. He then went into a steep dive and the glows followed in sharp precision. He banked as sharply as he dared as the objects followed. For 2 minutes, the lights stalked the fighter through several intricate maneuvers, peeled off under perfect control, then blinked out. The purpose of these strange objects was a mystery, for they merely followed warplanes, but apparently never opened fire or otherwise attacked them. The term Foo Fighters came from a headline, "Where there's Foo, there's fire." Each side in the war seemed to believe that the Foo Fighters were the inventions of their enemy, and several reconnaissance missions were launched to gain further information. To date, it has never been clearly established where the technology came from, and the origins of the Foo Fighters remain a historical puzzle alongside the Scandinavian ghost rockets. What was clear, however, was that it wasn't Allied technology, and that was a serious cause of concern. Fact and fiction regarding the exact nature of these advanced German technologies have become fused. However, it is now clear that the Germans were developing craft that could be mistaken for what would nowadays be considered UFOs. In fact, such developments make perfect sense. Each side during the war relied heavily on their aerial capabilities. One sure way to disable such abilities was to take out enemy runways. Either side could have had the best air fleet on the planet, but without somewhere to take off from, such a fleet was impotent. Therefore, the development of a craft that did not require any runway, like Fock's designs, could potentially alter the eventual course of the war. As it turned out, the designs were only coming online as the war ended, but had the conflict continued, it is conceivable that these new technologies could have altered the shape of history. However, exactly what was being developed is now less a matter of historical record and more of a historical jigsaw, with not only pieces missing but other pieces conceived in the minds of writers who then peddled fictitious Nazi flying saucer myths to those who chose to believe them. Establishing fact from fiction from over 50 years ago is no easy matter, and we are forced to consider information that is largely unverifiable. Yet, when pieced together, a plausible story of Nazi flying disc technology does begin to emerge. One person who made claims regarding the development of flying saucers in Nazi Germany is former Luftwaffe flight captain and aircraft designer Rudolf Schreiber. He claimed in 1950 that he and a small team had worked on facilities near Prague, developing a saucer-type vehicle. The story first appeared in Der Spiegel magazine on March 30th, 1950, in an article entitled Untertassenflügel Kombination, which stated, Rudolf Schreiber, who says engineers throughout the world experimented in the early 1940s with flying saucers, is willing to build one for the United States in 6 to 9 months. The 40-year-old Prague University graduate said he made blueprints for such a machine, which he calls a flying top, before Germany's collapse, and that the blueprints were stolen from his library. He says the machine would be capable of 2,600 miles per hour, with a radius of 4,000 miles. Schreiber is now a U.S. Army driver at Bremerhaven. His claims are backed up by a 1975 Luftfahrt International report that noted that after Schreiber's death in the late 1950s, papers found amongst his belongings revealed incomplete notes for a large flying saucer, a series of sketches of the machine, and several newspaper clippings of himself and his alleged machine. Up to his death, Schreiber had repeatedly claimed that the UFO sightings since the end of the war were proof that his original ideas had been taken further with successful results. Researcher Bill Rose was able to discover that Schreiber was involved with other scientists, Klaus Habermal and Giuseppe Belluzzo, an Italian engineer, as well as one Dr. Walter Mithe. Rose's research established that Mithe had been the director of the saucer program at 2 facilities located outside Prague. We know little more about Mithe's activities at this time, but it does seem that he knew Wernher von Braun, of whom much more later. We certainly do know that one scientist, Victor Schauberger, was involved in the production of flying discs, and that he flew one in 1945 near Prague, just as Schreiber had claimed. His experimental prototypes were based on levitation. Born in 1885, Schauberger considered the natural world his greatest teacher, although many in the world consider Schauberger to be somewhat deranged. In forests alongside rivers, he studied what he considered life-enhancing energy, water, and air vortices. He argued that prevailing technology uses the wrong forms of motion. It is based on entropy, on motions which nature uses to break down and scatter materials. However, nature uses a different type of motion for creating order and new growth. The prevailing explosion-based technology, fuel burning and atom splitting, only fills the world with expanding heat-generating centrifugal motion. Schauberger believed that energy production could instead use inward-moving, cold-generating centripetal motion, the same as nature employs to build and enliven structures. Even hydroelectric power plants, Schauberger said, use a destructive motion. They pressure water and chop it through turbines. The result is dead water. He built suction turbines that he considered enlivened and invigorated, resulting in clean, life-giving water downstream. Schauberger also produced electrical power from a unique suction turbine using implosion principles, and was later pressured into developing a propulsion system using the same principles applied to air. Hitler wanted Schauberger to supervise the building of a new flying craft that could levitate without burning any fuel. This idea for this new craft was based upon a discovery made by Schauberger a few years before of how to develop a low-pressure zone at the atomic level. The scientist claimed to have achieved this in a laboratory setting when his prototype whirled air or water, radially and axially, at a falling temperature. Schauberger named this resulting force as diamagnetic levitation power, and noted that nature already used this direct or reactionary suction force in weather generation, solar fusion stability, etc. Schauberger was given a team of scientists to help him with his work, and he insisted that these be treated as free men rather than prisoners of the Nazis. During their work, however, their research headquarters was bombed, and they were all transferred to Leonstein. There, they perfected the flying disc, powered by Schauberger's turbine, which rotated air into a twisting type of oscillation, resulting in the buildup of immense power causing levitation. Schauberger's prototype was then developed into a vehicle known as the Belluzzo-Schreiber Mithe discus. a machine built up to 22 feet in diameter. These craft traveled at over 2,000 kilometers per hour and were planned to go over 4,000. By 1945, they could reach 1,300 miles per hour and gain an altitude of 40,000 feet in less than 3 minutes. The craft was also noted to glow blue-green as it rose and left a silvery glow. The Munich publication Das Neue Zeitalter wrote in 1956, Victor Schauberger was the inventor and discoverer of the new motive power, implosion, which, with the use of only air and water, generated light, heat, and motion. The publication reported that the first unmanned flying disc was tested in 1945 near Prague, and that it could hover motionless in the air and could fly as fast backwards as forwards. It was also reported to have a diameter of 50 meters. Other evidence in support of this event had appeared earlier in an interview given on the 18th of November 1954 to the Zurich-based Tages and Zeiger. One George Klein stated that he had witnessed a flying saucer test on the 14th of February 1945, and that the craft had reached a height of 30,000 feet in just 3 minutes and could travel at hundreds of miles an hour. In this interview, Klein gave further information regarding developments behind the disc, claiming that some of the work had taken place at Peenemünde, where the V-2 rocket was being developed and where Wernher von Braun was director. Klein also stated that the stability of the craft had been achieved using a gyroscope, the same method used by the von Braun-Dornberger team. The research then moved to the Mittelwerk underground facilities near Nordhausen in the Harz Mountains. The Bible of the story of the development of the atomic bomb, Brighter Than 1,000 Suns, also confirms these events. Quote, the first of these flying saucers, as they were later called, circular in shape with a diameter of some 45 yards, were built by the specialists Schreiber, Habermohl, and Mitha. They were first airborne on February 14, 1945, over Prague, and reached in 3 minutes a height of nearly 8 miles. They had a speed of 1,250 miles per hour, which was doubled in subsequent tests. End quote.